everybody, I'm Nina. My partner is Maddie. Just given the way this was all recorded, you will see her later. I promise you will see Maddie. But just to give you a little introduction, we chose Anton Chekhov's play, The Three Sisters, and we're going to be giving you all the information you need to answer your quizzes about it, and we hope you enjoy. So, we're going to talk about Chekhov's life before he became a writer. He was born January 29th in 1860, which makes him an Aquarius. Thank you to Lila for that information. She actually gave us Chekhov's entire birth chart for fun one day. So if you're interested in Chekhov's birth chart, or I guess the birth chart of any other classical playwright, you could talk to Lila about that. He unfortunately died July 15th, 1904 from tuberculosis, and he grew up with an abusive father. His father drove the family into bankruptcy after being cheated by a contractor when he was trying to build a new house. So to avoid debtor's prison, he picked up the family and fled to Moscow, where they lived very, very dirt poor lives. It was horrible. But blessing in disguise, Anton was left behind in Taganrog, where they were living beforehand, and he had to support himself and pay for his own education. But Chekhov ended up attending medical school and became a doctor. He practiced medicine all throughout his literary career and is quoted as saying, "Medicine is my lawful wife, and literature my mistress. When I get tired of one, I spend the night with the other." On this slide, we have Chekhov's big four plays. They include Siegel from 1896, Uncle Vanya from 1899, Three Sisters, Our Show from 1901, and The Cherry Orchard from 1904. So Maddie and I looked into all four of these plays. Siegel we rolled out pretty quickly just because we read a Backstage.com synopsis of it and it just didn't seem like our thing. Same thing goes for Cherry Orchard. We just wanted, if we were going to have to read a 4-act play, to really enjoy what we were reading. So Uncle Vanya seemed very, very dramatic, so that could have been fun for us, but we settled on Three Sisters because the three main characters are, again, the three sisters, who are these three young women who we felt that if we were going to do the monologues, we could relate to very easily. So we settled on that, and let's get into some background on this show. It was first performed in 1901, and it was inspired by the three daughters of Colonel B.I. Nevsky, and it was also inspired by the Lintbrev sisters. Chekhov met these two groups of people in 1883, and he observed the way they interacted with each other. Both of these families were upper-class families, so the way they interacted with each other was part of it, but also the way they interacted with the world around them helped inform the way that the sisters in the play are. The work was contracted by Konstantin Stanislavski and Vladimir Nemirovich Dichenko, and it was contracted to stimulate public interest for new drama at the Moscow Art Theater. Unfortunately, the show received kind of lukewarm reviews after its first performance. This is because of a sort of dissatisfying ending. We'll get into that later. We're going to get into some notable productions now. Our first notable production is in 1938 at the Queen's Theatre in London. You're going to see some familiar names, see some familiar faces. John Gielgud played Vershinin. If you remember our 9th grade classical actor projects, you might remember that name. Gwen Francon Davies played Olga. Michael Redgrave of the Redgrave family played Tuzenbach. Alec Guinness, who you might know from Star Wars, played Fedotik. Carol Goodner was Masha. Peggy Ashcroft was Irina. And George Devine was Andre. Our second notable production was in 1981 at the Other Place in Stratford-upon-Avon. It was directed by Trevor Nunn, who is the former artistic director of the Royal Shakespeare Company. Roger Rees played Tuzenbach. Timothy Spall, who you might know from Harry Potter or Alice in Wonderland, played Andre. And Suzanne Bertish played Masha. And our final notable production is the original production at the Moscow Art Theater in 1901. Konstantin Stanislavski, who we talked about earlier, who contracted the show, also starred as Vershinin, and he also directed the show. Olga Knieper played Masha. The part was written for her because she was sort of like the big actress at the Moscow Art Theater at the time. Margarita Svitskaya played Olga. Maria Andreeva played Irina. Konstantin Stanislavski's wife, Maria Lilina, played Natasha. Vaisvold Meyerhold played Tuzenbach. Mikhail Gromov played Saloni, and Alexander Elcham played Shibutikin.
Here to tell you about the characters of the three sisters, but we're going to start off with talking a little bit about Russian naming convention, what that means, how they name people in Russia. So basically, Olga, Maria, Irina, and Andre are all given names or names celebrated on a name day. The middle name is derived from the father's first name, which is Sergei, hence Sergeyevna, Sergeyevich. Prozorov is the family name, and it's feminized for women or stays the same, or an O is added for men. Prozorova, Prozorov, Prozorova. And when a woman is married, she takes on the man's last name, and it's feminized, hence Maria Sergeyevna Kulagina being Kulagina and not Prozorova anymore, because she's married to Fyodor Ilyich Kulagin. So we're going to start off with Olga Sergeyevna Prozorova. She's the eldest of the three sisters. She's the matriarchal figure at 28 years old in the beginning of the show. She's a teacher at a high school, and she's a spinster, which means she's an unmarried woman. Next, we have Maria Sergeyevna Kulagina, or Masha. She's the middle sister. She's 23 years old in the beginning. She's married to Kulagin at 18 years old, and she ends up disappointed in the marriage as she is in love with Lieutenant Colonel Vershinin. She has an affair with Vershinin, and then he is transferred. Kulagin, however, forgives her for her unfaithfulness. She has a very short temper. She disapproves of Natasha the most of the three sisters. Natasha we'll be getting into at the end of this slide. And just a little fun fact, she's a trained concert pianist. Next, we have Irina Sergeyevna Prozorova. She's the youngest sister. She's 20 in the beginning of the show, and it's her name day, which, like I said, is the celebration day involving her given name of Irina. She insists she's grown despite her youth and desires to return to Moscow the most of the sisters. She agrees to marry Baron Tuzenbach and gets a teaching degree at the end of the show. Next, we have Andrei Sergeyevich Prozorov. He's the brother of the three sisters. In Act 1, he's becoming a professional in Moscow. Or a professor in Moscow, sorry. He's married to Natasha, stuck with a baby with her. He has a gambling problem, which leads to, in Act 3, him mortgaging the house. In Act 4, he's basically a failure fallen under Natasha. Next, we have Natalia Ivanova, or Natasha. She is Andrei's love interest. She has no family of her own. In Act 2, she's bossy and manipulative, even though in Act 1, she's very meek. The sisters make fun of her for a dress she's wearing, are horrible to her, drive her away from a dinner, all of this stuff. But in Act 2, she becomes this bossy, manipulative tyrant. She has her affair with Protopopov. In Act 3, she's even more controlling. In Act 4, she inherits complete control of the house, and she has two kids, Bobek and Sophia. Next, we have the soldiers of the story, starting with Alexander Ignatyevich Vershinin. He's the lieutenant colonel commanding of the army. He knew the sister's father in Moscow. He's the one who has the affair with Masha. His wife regularly attempts suicide. Now, this was mentioned very briefly in the play, and it's never really explained why. It's just mentioned that his wife regularly attempts suicide. And he has two daughters. Then we have Baron Nikolai Vovich Tuzenbach. He's the lieutenant of the army. He's not deemed very handsome. He's often attempting to impress Irina, as he's loved her for 5 years. He quits the army to work in an attempt to impress her. He's taunted by Soloni. Soloni declares a duel with him, and he is killed in the duel. Then we go to Soloni, Staff Captain Vasily Vasilyevich Soloni. He's the captain of the army, a social misfit, in love with Irina. He puts Baron down to look better in front of Irina, and he kills Baron in the end. Ivan Romanovich Shabudikin is Nina and I's favorite character. He's 60 years old, an army doctor. He starts off as fun and eccentric. He exults in his place as a family friend. In Act 3, while drunk, he suffers an existential crisis and reveals Natasha and Protopopov's affair. In Act 4, he's come to terms with his crisis, or he's broken by it. It's never really decided which. But he was in love with the sister's mother before she died. Then we have Alexei Petrovich Fedotik. He's a sub-lieutenant of the army. He hangs around the house. He tries to express his love for Irina through gifts. We have another person in love with Irina. He's an amateur photographer. He loses his belongings in the fire in Act 3, but somehow remains happy. Then we have Vladimir Karlovich Rodet. He's a sub-lieutenant and a drill coach at the high school. Then we have the other characters in the Three Sisters, starting with Farapont. He's a doorkeeper at the council offices, an old man with partial hearing loss, and he usually blurts out random facts about Moscow for no reason. Anfisa is the elderly family retainer and former nurse. She's 81 years old. She's worked for the Prozorov family forever, and at one point, Natasha begins to hate her and threatens to throw her out, but Olga rescues her, taking her to live at Olga's flat, which she moves to in the end of the show.
Starting off in Act 1, we're introduced to the Prozorov children. Olga is the oldest, and she's working as a school teacher at the local high school. She's a spinster, as we mentioned before. Masha's the middle child, and she's married to Fyodor Ilyich Kulagin. They were married when Masha was very young, and Kulagin was much older than her, so their marriage is sort of on rough times. Kulagin's very, very much in love with Masha, but she feels a little smothered by him. Then there's Irina, who is the youngest sister. She dreams of going to Moscow and meeting her true love and just having this very lovely life. She's sort of the most innocent of the sisters to start out. She starts out at 20 years old. The children grew up in Moscow, but because she's the youngest, she has the fewest memories of the place before they left, so she wants to return to sort of like gain back what she feels she was never given. Then there's their brother Andre, who is in love with a common girl named Natasha. Natasha really, really disappointed me in this show because she starts off and you kind of feel bad for her because the sisters are so horrible at this dinner party that they host for Irina's name day, which we will talk about a little bit later. They just rip her to shreds about the dress that she's wearing. They come for the style, they come for the color. Just they're very, very horrible to her, and you feel really bad for her because she's so out of place and she really doesn't do anything to them. So they taunt her, but we see what happens with her later. Just wait. As I mentioned before, it begins on the anniversary of their father's death, but that also happens to be Irina's name day, which is really unfortunate because that is kind of like a Russian birthday. So to share your birthday with your father's death has to really, really suck. And by the ending of Act 1, Andre confesses his love for Natasha while consoling her because of the way that his sisters had treated her and asks her to marry him.
Act 2, we take a jump in time when Andre and Natasha are finally married. They have one child named Bobik. Natasha is having an affair with Protopopov. Masha comes home from a night out with Lieutenant Colonel Vershinin and declares to herself that they are in love. And Natasha ruins party plans, basically by being herself. And Tuzenbach and Solony both declare their love for Irina at the end of Act 2, which gets a little messy.
Act 3 centers around a fire in the town. This is the fire that takes Vidotik's house and it ultimately ends up affecting Vershinin as well. Amidst this whole thing, everyone running in and out of the house, trying to take care of everybody, trying to stop this fire, the sisters are very angry with Andre because he's mortgaged their home to pay off the gambling debts that he has acquired over the course of the show. And in turn, he has conceded the power of the house over to Natasha. We learn that Natasha is very cruel to Anfisa, and Olga tries to stand up to Natasha in Anfisa's favor, but there's really nothing that she can do because now the sisters are not the women of the house. Natasha is, because she is the wife of the man of the house. Masha confides her love for Vershinin to her sisters, and that does not go over well because she's a married woman, she's a teacher, she's a part of the Prozorov family, and they have to uphold this image, this very stately image, and they cannot have a scandal on their hands. Irina despairs at her life as with her new job as a municipal worker, and earlier in the show, she had delivered a monologue about how she believes that everyone in the world should work, everyone should serve a purpose. This is so much a part of her that Baron Tuzenbach earlier in the show actually completely flat out quits the army to impress her. So she realizes that this life as an employee is nowhere near as great as she thought it was. With Olga's advice, she agrees to marry Tuzenbach, even though she doesn't love him, but she does respect him, mostly for the way that he was willing to, leave behind his army position in order to impress her. Then Shibutikin drunkenly smashes a clock, which belonged to the late children's mother, who it is revealed that he was in love with. And Andre vents his self-hatred, and he admits to all the things that he's done wrong, all of the ways that he's fallen short of being the man that he was supposed to be to take care of his sisters.
Finally, we have Act 4. This opens behind the family's home with the soldiers, who are now family friends, preparing to leave the area. It's very tense because Solony has challenged Tuzenbach to a duel, but Tuzenbach is intent on hiding it from Irina in order not to hurt her. However, Irina confesses to Tuzenbach that she cannot love him. Tuzenbach and Solony go off stage. A gunshot is heard, and it is declared that, Tuzenbach has died at the hand of Solony. Masha is pulled from Vershinin's arms, crying. Fyodor, however, accepts her back as a lover. Olga has accepted the position of headmistress of the school reluctantly. It's never really discussed why it was so reluctantly that she didn't want to become headmistress, but she accepts it regardless. She moves out with Anfisa to protect her from Natasha's cruel ways. Irina's fate is really uncertain at the end of the show. It's never really discussed where she's going, what she's going to do from there, but we know that she wants to preserve in her work and become a teacher. Natasha sadly remains in control of the home and traps Andre in a marriage with 2 children that he really doesn't want to be in, and the show ends with the 3 sisters watching the soldiers march off. Very somber.